It was one of the most painful episodes we've ever seen on Sister Wives. But for many of us watching, the heartbreak didn't just come from the tragic loss of Garrison Brown, it came from how the show chose to tell his story. The moment the words appeared on the screen announcing that Garrison had died by suicide, a wave of shock swept through viewers. But what followed in that episode wasn't just mourning, it was a carefully crafted narrative. One that tried to rewrite years of estrangement, silence, and emotional distance into a last-minute story of fatherly sorrow. And honestly, it left a lot of us stunned, confused, and even angry. Hi everyone, I'm Helena, and this is TLC's Sister Wives News. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with me for a while, you know I don't hold back when something feels wrong, so please make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments how you felt watching this episode. Because I know I'm not the only one who felt something was off. Let's be real, this episode was more than just sad. It was emotional, yes, but it was also deeply uncomfortable to watch, and for good reason. While Garrison's death was acknowledged with somber music and tight, quiet shots of the family, what stood out most wasn't what was said, but what wasn't. Where was the honest reflection? Where was the accountability? Instead of facing the painful truth that Cody had been emotionally distant from Garrison for years, the episode seemed to bend over backwards to frame him as a grieving, present father. And that's where the problem begins. Because for those of us who've watched every season, who've heard the arguments, seen the broken relationships, and followed the emotional decline between Cody and his sons, this sudden portrayal of Cody as a loving father just didn't sit right. Not when we've heard Garrison beg for contact. Not when we saw Cody ignore his texts. And not when we know that, even after his son reached out with one final message, Cody never responded. This episode could have been a moment for truth, for real reflection, but instead it felt like damage control, and we need to talk about why that hurts even more than the loss itself. As the season unfolded, many viewers started to notice something strange. Garrison was practically invisible. A son who had once been a vibrant, outspoken presence in the family had all but vanished from the storyline. There were no updates on how he was doing, no glimpses into his life, and barely a mention of the strained relationship between him and Cody. It was as if he had been edited out of existence. And now, in hindsight, that silence feels less like an oversight and more like a choice. The truth is, Garrison wasn't a background character in this family. He was central to the tension that's been boiling for seasons. His fallout with Cody wasn't some side note, it was a glaring example of what went wrong in this family. But somehow, TLC chose to bury that tension, almost like they were prepping the audience for a version of events where Cody wasn't the absent father, but the misunderstood one. And when Garrison died, that edit suddenly made sense. What we saw in the episode wasn't just grief, it was a rewrite. Scenes filmed before Garrison's death were suddenly given a new weight. Old conversations were recontextualized to look like Cody was more engaged, more wounded, more present than he had actually been. Some of the footage was repackaged to soften Cody's image, like when he talked vaguely about missing his kids or struggling to connect. But where was that empathy when Garrison was alive? Where was that urgency to fix things when Garrison reached out and Cody stayed silent? There's something deeply unsettling about watching this emotional backpedaling happen in real time, because it's not just Cody doing it, it's the show. TLC had months, even years, to show Garrison's pain, his isolation, his desperate need to be heard and seen by his father. And they didn't. It was only in death that his story became relevant. And that's not just heartbreaking, it's enraging. Instead of honoring Garrison by telling the full truth, the show seemed more focused on salvaging Cody's image. They gave him long, reflective interviews, emotional music cues, pensive stares out windows. But the emotion felt hollow. Not because grief isn't real, but because the narrative didn't match the reality we had all watched unfold for years. It was emotional, yes, but emotionally dishonest. The real heartbreak here isn't just in the way the episode was edited, it's in what it revealed, or rather, confirmed, about the deep fracture between Cody and Garrison. This wasn't some quiet, subtle disconnect that viewers might have missed. It was loud, it was painful, and it was played out in front of us season after season. And yet somehow, when tragedy struck, The show tried to make it seem like this was a father blindsided by grief, when in reality, he had already walked away long before Garrison ever left this world. Let's go back. This estrangement didn't happen overnight. One of the most gut-wrenching moments in recent memory was when Cody outright called Garrison a narcissist. Not out of concern, not in a moment of private frustration. He said it on camera, publicly, as if Garrison's pain, his anger, his attempts to set boundaries and speak his truth were just some kind of personality flaw. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was a choice. And it told us everything about how Cody viewed his son once he stopped complying. When Garrison and Gabriel extended an olive branch, inviting Cody to Christmas after months of distance, hoping to reconnect, Cody refused. He didn't say he'd try. He didn't ask to work things out. He shot them down. And in doing so, he sent a message loud and clear that their emotional needs didn't matter as much as his pride. He wasn't a father seeking healing. He was a man keeping score. We also saw Cody mock Garrison's decision to move out, live with roommates, build his own life. Instead of celebrating that independence, he treated it as rebellion, as betrayal. He framed Garrison's growing up as an attack on his authority. And the worst part? He didn't seem curious at all about who Garrison was becoming. He didn't ask questions. He didn't show up. He just made assumptions and passed judgment. And then came the most haunting moment of all, the final text message Garrison sent to his father, a message Cody admitted he never replied to. Garrison reached out. It was emotional, vulnerable, a moment where maybe, just maybe, the door could have been reopened. But Cody didn't walk through it. He left it hanging, and now it's too late. Compare that with the way Janelle spoke about her son. You could hear the love in her voice, the pride, the pain, the deep understanding of who Garrison really was. Gabriel broke down, remembering the closeness they shared. Madison talked about his heart, his kindness, the way he made people laugh. These weren't vague platitudes. These were real memories, filled with texture and detail, because they actually knew him. They actually loved him. And they showed up. Cody's statements, on the other hand, felt like they were pulled from a script. He talked about pain and regret, but never told us who Garrison was to him, what he loved about him, what made him special. And that silence, that emptiness, it says more than any staged scene or sorrowful gaze ever could. Let's talk about Robin for a moment, because her role in all of this can't be ignored. She's often been cast as Cody's emotional anchor, the one who provides him comfort when things get rough. But if we're being honest here, there's something off about how she handles things, especially in the wake of Garrison's death. And it's not just the cold demeanor she put on for the cameras. It's the way she's complicit in isolating Cody even further from his other children. Viewers are seeing it. They can feel it. There's something about Robin's emotional detachment that feels like it's always there, lurking just beneath the surface. It's not just about how she reacts to tragedy, it's about how she's been consistently there, gently guiding Cody away from the rest of the family, from any real accountability, from the deeper emotional work that would force him to truly face his mistakes. You can see her deflecting every time Cody seems like he might shift even slightly in his thinking. Every time there's a crack in his armor, Robin is right there to reinforce it, pulling him back into the same patterns. What frustrates viewers the most is how much Robin appears to avoid the emotional depth of the situation. Garrison's death should have been a moment where the family, despite their fractures, came together to grieve and process. But instead, we're watching Robin and Cody center themselves in this tragedy, turning it into a performance of grief, one that felt more like a public spectacle than a private moment of loss. The sadness was real, but the way it was expressed felt rehearsed, polished, and ultimately fake. Cody's sorrow was all about him, and Robin's presence only seemed to further amplify that. But here's where Robin's influence becomes particularly insidious. She subtly encourages Cody to stay in his disconnected bubble. It's like she's afraid of him truly facing the pain of his estrangement from Garrison. Because if he does that, maybe he'll have to confront how much he's failed as a father. Instead of being the catalyst for change, Robin seems content to let Cody remain in this cycle, unable to break free from it, unable to truly heal. She doesn't challenge him. She doesn't push him to reflect or grow, and in doing so, she becomes part of the problem, not the solution. Viewers have picked up on this. They see how Robin deflects the real pain, how she continues to play this role of the supportive wife while Cody remains, at his core, emotionally absent. It's as if she's more invested in maintaining the status quo than in seeing any actual healing happen. And let's be real, that's incredibly frustrating to watch, especially when you know that people like Janelle and Gabriel are aching to share their own stories, to honor Garrison's memory in a way that feels authentic. But no, we're stuck with this staged, self-serving portrayal of grief, and it's just painful to witness. In contrast to the empty grief we saw from Cody and Robin, let's take a moment to talk about the real grief, the kind of grief that doesn't need to be manipulated for a camera or polished for a show. I'm talking about the raw, unfiltered emotions from Garrison's family members who truly knew him, loved him, and felt the weight of his loss deeply. Let's start with Janelle. When she received that phone call from Garrison, you could hear the heartbreak in her voice, the despair of knowing that her son was struggling in ways that she couldn't fix. That phone call, gosh, it was heartbreaking. It wasn't just about the call itself, though. It was the emotional burden Janelle carried, knowing that Garrison had reached out to her, knowing that he felt like he couldn't get the help he needed, knowing that the distance between them was so much more than physical. It was a gut-wrenching realization that no matter how much you want to help, sometimes it's too late. And in that moment, you could feel Janelle's pain, a grief that was real, that wasn't for show, that didn't need to be dramatized to be understood. Then there's Gabriel. His tribute to his brother wasn't scripted, it wasn't forced, it was raw, genuine, and filled with the kind of pain that only comes from losing someone you love so deeply. Gabriel's trauma wasn't something to be glossed over or turned into a story arc for the cameras. It was real, and it was messy. Watching him grieve, seeing the depth of his emotional pain, it was a reminder of just how much this family had been through, and how much Garrison had been ignored, abandoned, and misunderstood by the very people who should have been there for him. Gabriel's grief wasn't just a storyline, it was a brother mourning his sibling, and that's something that can't be faked. And then we have Christine and Madison, who also displayed a genuine kind of grief, one that came from love, not from obligation. You could see the sincerity in their faces, the way they reflected on Garrison's life and the memories they shared with him. It wasn't about playing the part of a grieving family member. It was about feeling the loss. Christine's tears were real. Madison's tribute was real. These were not scripted moments. These were moments of raw vulnerability, the kind of moments that make you pause and really reflect on what it means to lose someone you care about. Contrast all of this with the burial scene in Wyoming, which felt so out of place for Garrison's life. Let's be real. Wyoming wasn't where Garrison thrived. It wasn't where his spirit had truly lived. That burial felt like a disconnect from the reality of who Garrison was, a young man who had spent much of his life struggling to fit into a family that, frankly, had not always been there for him. The entire thing just felt like another attempt to clean up a story that had never been fully told, burying Garrison in a place that was more symbolic than personal. It didn't sit right, and it left us all with a sour feeling because it was just another way the show tried to frame the narrative. It wasn't about honoring Garrison's life. It was about shaping his death to fit a story that felt more like an afterthought than a tribute. As we wrap up this heartbreaking look into the portrayal of Garrison's death, one thing becomes painfully clear. Cody Brown never takes accountability for the part he played in his son's life and death. Throughout this episode, we hear him say, "What if I'd done this? What if I'd done that?" But here's the thing. He's still refusing to make any real changes. He's still refusing to take responsibility. It's almost as if saying "what if" is the closest he's willing to get to acknowledging the pain he caused Garrison. But let's be clear. What ifs don't save lives. Accountability does. Cody can reflect all he wants, but nothing he says or does feels like it's coming from a place of true remorse or an understanding of the emotional neglect he subjected Garrison to. When you look at his behavior over the years, his coldness, his constant dismissiveness of Garrison's struggles, it's hard to watch him suddenly act like a grieving father. He had years to fix things, to step up as a father, and yet he didn't. And now, after Garrison's tragic death, Cody wants us to believe he's been forever changed. It doesn't add up. It's frustrating because it's not just about the past. It's about the fact that he hasn't made any significant changes. He's still the same Cody, and that's what's so disappointing. What's even harder to stomach is that Cody and Robin have been given a platform on TLC, continuing to manipulate their narrative and present themselves as the victims in all of this. When you've been given so many opportunities to change, when you've been given the privilege of an entire platform to tell your side of the story, you better take responsibility for your failures. But that's not what we saw here. Instead, we saw a disingenuous performance, with Cody and Robin centering themselves as victims of circumstance, when in reality, they've been the ones causing the most harm. Watching this episode gives us clarity. Cody and Robin are not the victims. The real victim here is Garrison. Garrison, who was failed by his father, who was ignored, whose struggles were dismissed as narcissism or irrelevance, whose pain was met with cold indifference. Garrison deserved better, in life and in death. His story deserved to be told with the truth, with honesty, not rewritten for the sake of a narrative. He deserved to be remembered for who he truly was, not the way Cody and Robin want to make him fit into their manufactured image of grief. It's heartbreaking. But this episode served as a glaring reminder of how easily people can twist their stories, how narratives can be manipulated for comfort and control. But as viewers, we can't let this pass without calling for accountability. Garrison's life mattered. His struggles mattered. And so, as we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What do you think about Cody's lack of accountability? How do you feel about the way Garrison's story was handled? Let's keep this conversation going in the comments, because Garrison's story deserves to be told, and we need to make sure his truth isn't erased. Make sure to subscribe to TLC's Sister Wives News for more emotional, real talk about the show. This isn't just gossip. It's about giving voices to the ones who've been silenced. So hit that subscribe button and let's continue to shed light on these stories that need to be heard. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.